I've been following the Doom Eternal development ever since we saw the first gameplay reveal back at QuakeCon of 2018. When I sat down with Marty and Hugo, the game's directors, they informed me that ray tracing has been on their roadmap for quite some time. However, with COVID hitting the world last year, it comes as no surprise that this particular update has taken a while to trickle down to us. But guys, just this past week, we finally get access to ray tracing with Doom Eternal, and in today's video, we're going to actually answer the question of if Doom Eternal's ray tracing actually lives up to the marketing hype, or is there a secret gem hidden beneath the release notes there that's actually the more impressive feature? Let's rip and tear. Hey guys, Turk here. I hope y'all are having a great day. Now before we get into the video, if y'all have yet to pick up Doom Eternal, I highly recommend y'all spend the 20 bucks and go over to the Steam store and get it and start playing. Now, if y'all are a little bit more budget conscious, maybe wait until August 19th when QuakeCon 2021 comes around, because Bethesda loves celebrating with their fans and they put all of their different IPs on huge discounts. So you might even be able to get the game at $10 or $15 come August 19th. Now, Doom Eternal is a fast-paced first-person shooter where they take the legendary aggressive gameplay from the original Doom and update it and modernize it to the 21st century. Id Software has been a trailblazer when it comes to game engine development, and when they rebooted Doom back in 2016, they got to highlight their latest engine, id Tech 6. Now, ray tracing technology is not a new technique for this particular studio. They actually got to integrate it into their Wolfenstein Youngblood game, and they got to utilize ray traced reflections to pretty good effect. They were able to add a little bit extra immersion as well as extra realism into that Nazi wascape. However, Wolfenstein Youngblood, it got some pretty mixed reviews, and unfortunately not a lot of people got to actually embrace and enjoy that newest engine. But with Doom Eternal, the team brings forth their latest iteration with id Tech 7, which harnesses the full power of the Vulkan API. Now, this finely tuned engine is capable of some pretty stunning visual capabilities, but they're also able to provide stellar performance when it comes to frame rate on a whole breadth of hardware. In the June 29th update, Doom Eternal enhances their graphical technologies by incorporating ray tracing techniques as well as enabling NVIDIA's AI-based upscaling technology DLSS into the mix. Now, in order to use ray tracing, make sure you're using NVIDIA's 2000 or 3000 series GPUs, and if you've got AMD, make sure you're using the 6000 series GPUs. Now, for right now, if you're going to be doing upscaling, you have to use Team Green in order to leverage that DLSS option. Now, I haven't heard any reports on when FSR is going to be enabled with Doom Eternal, but make sure you guys are following me over on Twitter, because as soon as we hear that news, I'm definitely blasting it all over the place. Now, ray tracing comes in many different variants, and with Doom Eternal, we're getting access to ray traced reflections. What this means is that all of the different surfaces in the game have some sort of reflective qualities to it, and as we're going through the game in real time, the engine calculates what the rays are going to look like coming off that reflection, be it, the guns shooting, the different lighting effects that are going on, and heck, even the environment itself is going to be incorporating some reflections. However, Doom is kind of a flat game, guys, to say the least, and the amount of reflective surfaces is just not as prevalent as games like Control. However, when there are reflective surfaces, the ray tracing effects are noticeable, and they do add that extra layer of immersion into our gameplay. Now, as for DLSS or upscaling in general, the main goal is to take a lower resolution base image, pipe it through NVIDIA's neural network in order to get a high quality, higher resolution output image. And the main benefit here is by using that lower resolution base image, we're able to get additional performance from our GPU since the graphical load isn't as severe. When coupled with ray tracing, we're able to actually offset some of that performance loss that we get from ray tracing turned on in order to get back to that native gaming experience. But if you're not using ray tracing, the added benefit of that lower render resolution actually increases your frame rate even further. However, as you go forward there, you might be seeing additional detail loss in your particular image. Now, we've covered ray tracing and upscaling, DLSS, FSR so many different times here on the channel that in order to not get into the weeds, I'll recommend you guys check out my technology playlist up at the top right. That way you can learn a bit more about how the technology works. But in today's video, we're only going to be talking about Doom Eternal, and we're going to be doing a quality comparison of ray tracing, quality comparison of DLSS, and of course, we're going to do a performance analysis of all the different options on a couple different sets of hardware that you guys might actually find pretty interesting. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the quality comparison of ray tracing and comparing it against ray tracing on versus ray tracing off in a couple of different instances, a couple different maps, and see if you guys can actually tell the difference between the two. Now, this first scene we're going to be looking at is from the Sentinel Prime map, where we're going into an arena-style battle and we're going one-on-one versus the big baddie. Now, on the left, we have ray tracing turned on, and on the right, we have ray trace turned off. Now, unfortunately, as we start this battle, I'm just disappointed that there's not additional ray trace reflections coming from this massive skull shield. However, with this 1v1 fight, we should be able to focus on some of the finer details of the battle and see if we can notice any of the reflections. Now, as we start with the shotgun and all the different sticky bombs, on the left we do notice that on the ground towards the center of the arena, we are able to notice additional reflections coming from that darker circle area. But if you go and look at the right, we do see some of the splash lighting that's coming on from our exploding grenades, and idTech 7 is actually able to kind of simulate these reflections to pretty good effect. Now, unfortunately, as we're zooming around this map, it's just not really clear if ray tracing's turned on. And as we go into the final finishing cinematic, again, the ray traced reflections are just not that pronounced. And coming from those massive light sources in the skull shield here, I'm just shocked that we're not getting additional effect coming from this particular battle. Since this 1v1 fight didn't have all that many reflections to look at, let's see what a more reflective map looks like. Now here we're going into the Doom Hunter base, and it should be pretty obvious on the left side there that the center part of the train railing actually sees significant amounts of ray trace reflections, whereas on the right there's just not a lot of reflections going on. However, with all the sticky bombs flying around, and as we go around this floating train, idTech 7 does a pretty decent job of kind of simulating all the explosions going on. And also, as we're going around the train, that flat matte metallic surface, it does scuff up some of the reflections, and the amount of detail is just kind of lost. As we transition to the inside of the Doom Hunter base, we are going to see what the reflections look like inside. Now, I'll focus your attention to the floor here because we're actually able to see some pretty decent reflections across the board. And as we go into the first main arena for the map, we're not going to actually engage any of the monsters here, and I'm actually going to show you what the particular environment looks like. And as we go up and over, sure enough, on both the right and left sides here, there's still significant reflections, even mimicking some of the environment going across the map. Now, as we finish our little loop here of the map, I wanted to see if you guys can tell the difference between the two. Ready? Let's go. Now, this is all being shot on the middle of the map, which I intentionally didn't show you, because now we're going to actually engage some monsters and do a little bit of fighting in these close corridors. And I was kind of curious to see what you guys think is the ray traced side. So let me know down in the comments what your guess is. Are you ready? And it shouldn't come as a shock, but ray tracing is on the left-hand side. I didn't change anything up. What I'm really proud to say is that idTech 7 does a really good job of simulating ray trace reflections, and let's see what happens when we change it up. Now, this is the Super Gore Nest, and I'm changing up the perspective here a little bit so y'all can get a little bit more of the environment into your perspective. The main goal in this part of the map is to kill the 3 mancubi that are guarding the different levels of the map, and I'm not going to tell you guys which side has the ray trace reflections turned on. Now, of course, when you're fighting the mancubus, you got to destroy the arm cannons, and since we've got the heavy cannon, we use our super scope there and destroy them from a distance in order to make the fight significantly easier. Is that really shocking, guys, that ray tracing is turned on the bottom? The main reason I can really tell is because the reflections of this blood on this lower level are actually able to reflect a little bit better than on the standard side. So as we wrap up the ray traced reflections, it shouldn't come as a shock though that on the left side in this overhang as we go into the Mars complex, that we do get some pretty decent reflections, but as we pivot through the rest of this map, it goes and shows that there's just not a lot of reflections going on. So now let's take a look at how DLSS looks. Now we're going to go all the way over to DLSS performance mode because I could really only tell a difference here when we zoom into this officer's uniform and we start to see some graphical glitching on his textures, and I also noticed some issues with the shadows underneath his nose. However, this is Doom Eternal. We are playing a fast-paced game here and we shouldn't be focusing on those types of textures. And switching over to the quality mode, I'm just surprised at just how well the image looks. Now, we'll be looking at performance in just a second, but as we zoom into this plasma rifle here, God, they're really dang close. Now, last time we take a look at ray traced reflections, on the left we have ray tracing turned on, and on the right we have it turned off. And I'm just amazed at just how well idTech is able to actually fake the reflections, especially with the BFG exploding. Now here's a cool little detail. If you look on the left inside of the reticle as we go down the elevator, you can actually see the glimpse of the Doom guy being shown, which is pretty awesome in my opinion. Alright, so let's take a real look at DLSS quality in action. Now this is from the first map in the game, and this is from my actual benchmarking loop. Now I'm starting off with quality mode because, to be honest, the quality mode is actually really good and I highly recommend it in most cases, but I'm really curious to see if you guys can tell the difference in the performance mode. Now all of this footage is shot at 1080p, so we should be getting the worst possible quality when it comes to DLSS performance. But as we're getting into the thick of things with this firefight with the arachnoid or whatever, man, I can hardly tell the difference between the right and the left. Even when zooming in with the heavy cannon there, the motion is just so fast that it's hard to focus on the finer details. As we jump the gap here on the left-hand side, we're going to switch over to the balanced mode. And again, it's a pretty good compromise when it comes to graphical quality and frame rate performance. But again, it's pretty hard to tell the difference. So this last part inside of the subway is the most intense fighting in this first scene. And as we're going through here, throwing our sticky bombs, using our chainsaw to charge up on some ammo, guys, I'm just amazed at just how well this looks and also just how well it performs. Now, I wanted to look at the full screen performance mode here for just a minute and see if you guys can notice the difference in the finer details. On second look here, I can actually notice a little bit of detail being lost on some of those faraway tiles in the subway. But did I mention there's a zombie in my face that I have to chainsaw real quick? Yeah, I think performance mode is actually really good here, and I actually would recommend guys playing with the performance mode engaged. So with all that in the back of our heads, let's go ahead and take a quick look at the performance that we get in this game. Now we are going to be testing our RTX 3080, and we're going to be covering 1080p, 1440p, as well as 4K. But if you stick towards the end of this section, we actually got another different graphics card that's going to help seal the deal when it comes to Doom Eternal with the Ray Tracing performance update. Now let's start off with 1080p on our Ryzen 9 5900X with the RTX 3080. Towards the middle of the screen, you're running at 330 FPS on average, but if you're going to be turning on ray trace reflections, guys, we are losing around 100 FPS, which is pretty astounding. Now, fortunately though, with the DLSS options engaged, we are able to buy back 30 FPS going into the quality mode, but going between balanced and performance mode, we're only getting between 8 and 10 additional frames, which unfortunately still lags behind our native resolution gameplay by about 50 FPS. But if you forgo the ray tracing option and go straight to DLSS, we are able to go up 16 FPS going just to the straight quality mode, and we gain an additional 12 and then an additional, 17 frames going all the way to DLSS performance mode. Now, of course, we have to go and look at some of the numbers that the marketing teams love to talk about, and unfortunately, that minus 30% performance degradation there with ray tracing turned on, it's hard to swallow, and unfortunately, as we turn on DLSS, we're only able to get to a 15% performance loss off to our native resolutions. And also a disappointing thing here is that we're only getting 5, 8, and 14 percentage point improvements going with DLSS turned on alone, which could be a good sign that FSR, AMD's upscaling technologies could be the better option in this particular game, especially since we're not able to see some of that graphical loss. Now going over to 1440p, the RTX 3080 actually starts to shine quite a bit, and with the RTX off native resolution experience, we are able to get 263 FPS. Now, of course, turning on ray tracing, we drop almost 80 FPS, which is again, quite a bit of sticker shock, but of course we see better scaling going up as we engage DLSS quality mode, going up about 30 FPS with the quality mode, getting an additional 14 FPS at balanced, and then an additional 13 going into performance mode, which we're almost right at the native resolution gaming experience, but just miss it by quite a bit. Now going the other way with ray tracing turned off, bumping into quality mode, we only gain 13 additional FPS, and again, going into balance and performance mode, we're only able to gain an additional 46 FPS from our native resolution gameplay, which, to be quite frank, is just not that stellar of a number. And that's only a 5, 11, and 17% performance improvement from our native gaming experience. That minus 30 percentage point decrease in performance, that's quite a lot of frames you're having to sacrifice for not a lot of ray tracing goodness. Now 4K with the RTX 3080 starts to get pretty interesting. At our native resolution performance, we are able to hit 161 FPS, and we only drop by about 50 FPS with going with ray tracing turned on. And we see our largest percentage point boost when we turn on DLSS quality mode, and that nets us an additional 31 FPS, which is actually really good. Now, an interesting thing to note before we go into just the raw DLSS is we are actually able to get right back to our native performance resolution settings at 162 FPS, which is a really good showing for the RTX 3080. Now, if you decide to go with just DLSS quality mode turned on, you are able to get 184, and going all the way up to the performance mode nets us an impressive 207 FPS. Turning on ray tracing sees a mighty 31% performance reduction just by turning on the ray trace reflections. However, turning on quality mode with DLSS does get us back closer to that native resolution, and stepping back up to performance mode, it does get us back to native. Now, what I like to see here is the quality, balanced, and performance mode improvements with DLSS turned on by itself. But again, echoing what we said with 1080p, I'm really interested to see what kind of performance improvement we would see with Doom Eternal with FSR. Now, I know a lot of you guys are still trying to get your hands on those RTX 3080s, and let's be honest, the performance with the 3080 is insanely high as we would expect. So what kind of performance should we get from some of the lower end RTX graphics cards? Well, lucky for us, I actually have right behind me an RTX 2060 mobile laptop that actually has a pretty decent processor teamed up. This is the Aorus 15G KB. I'll put the link down below to what it is for all the tech specs, but it's actually rocking kind of like a 2060 Max Q type of graphics card, which is actually probably the lowest spec RTX card you can get on the market. So let's see how that fares with Doom Eternal with ray tracing turned on and with DLSS turned on. Now this panel has a native 240 Hz refresh rate, and with ray tracing turned off, we are actually able to get right at 120 Hz, which matches a lot of the gaming laptops that are out there on the market. Now unfortunately, turning on ray tracing nets us a 60 FPS performance degradation, which is practically half at this point. We're still at above 60 FPS, which is good, but that kind of a performance loss is hard to miss. Fortunately though, just like 4K with the RTX 3080, going into the DLSS quality mode, we do get an additional 34 FPS, and we see some pretty linear scaling going forward. Now, DLSS quality mode with no ray tracing turned on, we start to see some pretty positive signs that by just increasing our DLSS setting, we are able to get some pretty impressive frame rates. Now, as we go into our percentage difference from native, of course with RTX on, we are getting close to a 50% performance reduction, but like I said, as we turn on DLSS, things are looking good with our RTX 2060 mobile. And what's more impressive here is at 1080p, we see a 13, 19, and 26 percentage point improvement without ray tracing turned on. Now, how about 1440p? Maybe you managed to snag a gaming laptop that has this same processor and you're curious how it'll run at the higher resolution. So fortunately, with our native gaming experience at high detail settings, we are able to get 98 FPS, but again, turning on ray tracing cuts our frame rates in half. Turning on DLSS nets us an impressive 36 FPS, and going up from there, we see linear progression going forward. Now, what I like to see here is that as we go up to DLSS quality modes, you can actually max out a 1440p 120Hz monitor with DLSS and performance mode, which is quite impressive for such a lowly equipped mobile GPU. And looking at the percent difference from native, we do see similar scaling as we saw with 1080p. And since I'm a glutton for punishment, let's see what this mobile GPU can do with 4K. Now, unfortunately, the RTX 2060 mobile only has access to 6GB of VRAM, so we unfortunately can't run an Ultra Nightmare to begin with, and if we are to engage any of the ray tracing options with or without DLSS enabled, we do get past that 6GB threshold, so we're only able to test with the DLSS options turned on. Which, let's be honest guys, 4K is kind of a stretch for this particular graphics card, but let's see if it's worth the wait. Now, we are able to play at 51 FPS right out of the gate with this GPU, but guys, going up to DLSS quality mode, we're already at 62 FPS, so I call that a win in my book. And if we go all the way up to DLSS performance mode, we are really close to hitting a locked 60 FPS with our 1% lows, which is a phenomenal performance for this little bitty graphics card. And of course, as we turn on 4K, looking at the percent difference from native, 22, 29, and 37% above our native resolution, that's a pretty good figure. So let's talk about conclusion. Doom Eternal is a great FPS, pushing for aggressive gameplay while incrementally adding incredibly difficult gameplay to the mix. Now, if it weren't for those darn platforming segments that we all hate, I would say that Doom Eternal does justice to the pedigree from all of the previous installments to the franchise. However, with the latest graphical update with Doom Eternal, I'm a little bit disappointed. As a forward-looking tech enthusiast, ray tracing has always been of interest to me, and I'm always liking to see how the different game engines actually integrate the techniques into their deliveries. However, the art style of Doom Eternal, it just doesn't fully embrace the technology as much as I would have hoped. A lot of the maps that are available to the base game, there's just not a lot of reflective surfaces, so it's a lot of wasted potential that could have been used elsewhere. And let's not forget, idTech 7 does a fantastic job of already replicating some of these reflections in their gameplay. A few of the maps have a lot of reflective surfaces, such as the cultist-based or any of the more high-tech zones, but a lot of the more organic maps, such as the Super Gore Nest, the ray tracing impact is just not there, and I don't think it's worth the additional performance cost that comes with the technology. So it's pretty easy to miss the actual inclusion of ray tracing into this update. But upscaling, on the other hand, that is superb. Now, in previous reviews with DLSS, I have always recommended going with either the quality mode or, if you're in a pinch, going with balanced mode. But even at 1080p, which is where we had all of our footage today, I found it very difficult to tell the difference between the balanced and the performance modes because we're just so engaged and engulfed in the tight gameplay mechanics that Doom Eternal provides. So it's really easy to lose some of that graphical fidelity and get all of that increased frame rate. And of course, with all of the different RTX cards, you're going to be able to push the limits of your adaptive refresh rate monitors or maintain your different refresh rates and get a more solid 1% low. And this is even great news for AMD's Fidelity FX Super Resolution, because as we showed in our previous review with the RX 580, we're able to see at 1080p double-digit performance improvements, which actually rivals the DLSS competitor in these instances, so I'm really interested to see when id Software decides to integrate this latest FSR technology into their engine. Bottom line, guys, I would definitely look past the ray tracing implementation in this game and just go straight towards the DLSS option and turn it up as high as you would like. id Software has done an excellent job with perfecting this game, and I highly recommend you guys go pick it up for 20 bucks. Unfortunately for the marketing teams, adding in ray traced reflections doesn't add any practical value when it comes to this particular game, but it does add an additional game under its belt in order to go on the ever-ending quest of one-upping the competition. And that's going to be my Doom Eternal ray tracing analysis video, guys. I hope you've enjoyed it. Let me know down in the comments if 1080p is a good delivery option for you guys, and let me know if y'all liked some of the formatting choices I used when it comes to my comparison shots. As always, y'all can follow me over on Twitter at The Turk. Hit subscribe, hit the bell, thumb up the video, all that other good YouTube stuff. It's time for bed, guys. I hope I'll catch you in the next one. Take care, Turk Force.